Right, good afternoon, everybody. We've got there in the end after typical police. I call this the window on the panes. I think it's the Neale out, that wasn't too corny, but it was the best I could come up. I think this must be the 6th, 7th, 8th presentation I've done now at various venues. I've lost count. But what I've done here is my usual thing, just reading through other people's research, pulling it all together into a sort of truncated overview that gives us something all to have a think about and then chew it over. There's a lot of great research on the pains. Jim Douglas touches on them in JFK and the Unspeakable. So does John Armstrong in Harvey Lee. Jim DiEugenio gives the pain serious attention in Destiny Betrayed, which I'll come to shortly. Now, I suppose you could argue that you can't really talk about the assassination and avoid the pains. But it's some of the more detailed focus on the couple that I've been interested in of late. When Neale asked the speakers, it wasn't long after I'd finished up going through the archive that had recently been posted over the summer at the Kennedys and King website as a retrospective of probe articles from the turn of the century. So it's been a good topic for me to try to cover today. As Jim DiEugenio said, it was truly groundbreaking work back then done by Carol Hewitt, Steve Jones, and Barbara LaMonica. And they deserve the most credit for what I'm going to talk about. As was pointed out in the brochure for this conference, it is quite timely, given that we now have the film by Max Good, The Assassination of Mrs. Payne, which, while I haven't seen it yet myself, I hear good things and I assume it covers quite a lot of ground I want to pick up here. Bart has also kindly sent me some files that I was only able to spin through briefly last night. So I might have to revisit this at a later date and add to it. So who are the Paynes and why are they important? (2515) West 5th Street, Irving, Texas. The address at which Lee Harvey Oswald slept the night of Thursday, November 21st, 1963. He didn't live there, but his wife Marina and their 2 children did. Lee would usually visit on weekends that fall to visit his family while spending the working week at various rooming houses in Dallas. Before that, as we all know, he'd spent much of 1963 flitting between Dallas, New Orleans, and potentially Mexico City, sometimes with, but more often without Marina. The Oswalds had been introduced to Ruth Payne at a party in February 1963 by way of their relationship with George Hollinger. The introduction was supposedly because Ruth was interested in learning conversational Russian, speaking Russian. She'd learned to read Russian, but had difficulty speaking the language and interacting with people in the language. But by as soon as April 1963, the pregnant Marina and her daughter June had moved in with Ruth, who had been estranged from her husband Michael since the previous September. It has been suggested that this was in fact an intelligence handover in terms of babysitting the Oswalds, as George de Montfort would leave for Haiti that summer. And they went on to play a significant part in both the lead up to November and during the investigation thereafter. Hewitt, Jones and LaMonica wrote in pro, quote, "In addition to sheltering Marina, the Payne residence provided a storage space for nearly all the evidence used in the official, unofficial indictment of Oswald. Even prior to the assassination, Ruth was collecting evidence. A letter from Lee to the Russian embassy had been found by Ruth on November 10th. She copied it by hand and later turned it over to the FBI. The client's order form, the Walker photograph, the backyard photo, and radical literature all surfaced when Ruth invited the Dallas police and FBI to search her home, giving them carte blanche to both Lee and Marina's possessions. Michael Ralph Payne was born on June 25th, 1928 in New York. His father was Lyman Payne, an architect and activist. His mother was Ruth Forbes Young, financial backer of the International Peace Academy and daughter of Elise Cabot Forbes of the influential Cabot family. Henry Cabot Lodge Jr. was defeated by JFK in the 1952 Massachusetts Senate election. Was Nixon's running mate in the 1960 presidential election, and at the time of the assassination was Kennedy's ambassador in Vietnam. Lodge's son George lost the 1962 Senate election to Ted Kennedy. But back to Michael Payne. He graduated from high school in New York in 1947 and attended Harvard University in Swarthmore County without graduate. After serving in the US Army, Payne worked for the Griswold Manufacturing Company and the Bartow Research Foundation in Pennsylvania. In 1958, Payne became employed at Bell Helicopter through his mother's third husband, Arthur M. Young, the designer of the first commercial helicopters, Bell 47. Bell would go on to deploy over 7,000 of the iconic UH-1 Iroquois helicopters, nicknamed Huey, during the Vietnam War. The previous year, Michael had married Ruth Avery Hyde. Ruth was born on September the 3rd, 1932, like Michael in New York. Her parents were William A. and Carol Lee Hyde. And she went to Antioch College, where she became a Quaker. In the late 1950s, she participated in Quaker pen pal programs via the East-West Contact Committee, which sponsored visits by Soviet citizens to the United States, and she began studying Russian in 1957. There was at least one document where a confidential informant suggests that it was through pen pal activity during this period that Ruth first contacted the Oswald family while they were in Russia. It was through their shared interest in folk dancing and music that Ruth met Michael Payne, and while Michael wasn't a Quaker, they would attend Society of Friends meetings together. When Michael started working for Bell Helicopter in Fort Worth, they moved to the suburb of Irving, and their children, Lynn and Christopher, were born in 1959 and 1961, respectively. Going from Probe again. According to friends and family, whom the FBI interviewed, the Paynes were upstanding, loyal Americans. Their relationship with the Oswalds could only have been of a charitable nature. Nevertheless, the close scrutiny of their FBI files reveals some intriguing intimations that link the Paynes, like Oswald, to the intelligence community. I'm going to play a video now that was part of Black Op Radio's 50 Reasons for 50 Years series in 2013. Episode 19 focused on the Paynes and is as good an introduction to the debate about the couple that I've been able to find.
After him, and he probably wanted to make a mark on somebody. He could.
He suddenly realized he had an opportunity to no longer be a little guy, but to be someone extraordinary.
One of the oddest things about Ruth and Michael Payne is their association with George de Morgenscheld and Alan Dulles.
This is Payne, how did you first become acquainted with the oswalds?
I met them through, friends at a party last winter.
This is how essentially Oswald was introduced to the Paynes, was through Georgia Marshall. Almost right after they were introduced, DeMoore and Cheryl stepped aside and went to Haiti, and Ruth and Michael Payne now became the Oswalds' best friends.
And then, saw more of Marina later. I was interested in talking with her because, I was trying to learn the language.
Ruth Payne seems to have been determined to separate off Marina from Lee from almost the moment they met. And her excuse for this was she wanted to learn Russian from Marina. One of the problems with this, when the FBI investigated Ruth Payne afterwards, they found out that she taught Russian at St. Mark's School for Boys. In just a matter of weeks, Ruth wrote a note inviting Marina to actually move in with her. This is just a matter of a few weeks. After this, they had a picnic with the Oswalds, and then Ruth drove Marina to New Orleans. The thing to remember about Ruth and Michael Payne is that their image in the Warren Commission volumes as friendly Texas Quakers is not really inaccurate. Both Ruth and Michael trace back to the Eastern Establishment and to the Central Intelligence Agency. Michael Payne's parents go back to the Boston Brahmins in Massachusetts. They extend all the way back to the Cabots and the Forbes families. In fact, Ruth Forbes was a close friend of Mary Bancroft. Mary Bancroft said she knew the mother of Michael Payne where Oswald stayed. Mary Bancroft was the girlfriend of Allen Dulles during World War II when she served as an OSS officer. They stayed personal friends after the war. Allen Dulles later on made a very interesting private joke about the critics of the Warren Commission. Dulles joked in private that the JFK conspiracy buffs would have a field day if they had known he had actually been in Dallas 3 weeks before the murder, that one of Mary Bancroft's childhood friends had turned out to be a landlady for Marina Oswald.
Mr. Payne, did Louis Oswald's political philosophy at any time indicate to you that he may have been capable of the crime he accused of?
I was very surprised when I heard the shot and fire from a building which I knew he worked. I followed him immediately, but persisted because I didn't think he was that irrational.
One of the interesting things that we know about Michael Payne is that due to an FBI classified document, he was actually made like he was a leftist communist to sympathize with Castro at Louis' restaurant right across the street from SMU in Dallas. FBI interviewed some of the students he had talked to, and one of the students picked out a picture of Michael Payne as a guy who was coming off as a Castro sympathizer. Now, why would he do something like that?
Did you ever have a chance to talk about Cuban conflict, Castro conflict? You were discussing thoughts on that.
He did mention that, and it was unfamiliar to me, so I didn't make it up. He just happened to mention briefly when it was brought to my attention. I didn't recall the
In Eric Tagg's book, Brush with History, which is about patrolman Buddy Waters, it's revealed that when he and a couple of other policemen went to Ruth and Michael Payne's home, they found a file cabinet full of letters, maps, records, and index cards with name of pro-Castro sympathizers. Why would they be doing that? Why would they be taking down the names of these pro-Castro sympathizers? When the FBI reviewed the case, they interviewed some of the people that Ruth visited in the summer. She took a semi-cross-country trip and then came down from Virginia to New Orleans. According to the FBI interviews, Ruth had told everyone she was going to pick up a Russian woman in New Orleans and bring her home to live with her in Irving. Once the Oswalds were formally separated, once Marina is brought back, Ruth Payne picks up their belongings, almost all of them, brings them to their home. Many of Oswald's belongings were now in her garage, and they were under her control at the time that Oswald was apprehended. And later, it was Ruth Payne and her husband, Michael, who became the source for a lot of the dubious evidence that was used to build a case against Oswald.
We've been watching the morning proceedings on the television, and I translated to her when I heard this. She was in shock. I was crying, and she was very upset. And this was our division when men came from the, police department in Dallas. That was the first that we had any indication with, from her people was associated with the tragic event.
To top this off, there's the famous phone intercept on the day of the assassination. Ruth and Michael have both acknowledged what happened in Dealey Plaza, and they said, we know who's responsible. The implication being that it really wasn't Oswald who was responsible.
The Warren Commission knew of this phone call, but rather than determine what exactly the Paynes were referring to, staff counselor Wesley Liebler instead confused the official record and suggested the phone call in question occurred on Saturday the 23rd, rather than Friday the 22nd. This allowed Michael Payne the opportunity to deny he ever said anything like that on Saturday.
Stay tuned for the next installment as we expose week after week 50 lies the Warren Commission would like you to believe.
You want the duck song? That would be my tune. Now, the first thing I thought when watching that was how much does Michael Payne look like Lee Harvey Oswald in that interview? It springs to mind for me the many stories of Oswald somehow being in more than one place at the same time, and the possibility of doubles or lookalikes setting him up with their provocative actions. I'm thinking about him test driving a car when he couldn't drive, and shooting at other people's targets at the rifle range as just two examples. Michael and Lee were known to spend some time together independent of their wives, such as attending a meeting of the American Civil Liberties Union. Yet after the assassination, Michael would testify as to how much he despised Oswald. He told the Warren Commission that he took an immediate dislike toward Lee. He was continually upset by the fact that Oswald refused to let Marina learn to read, speak, or write in English. Michael was also offended at the way Lee would bark orders at Marina, and he told author Thomas Mallon for his 2002 book, Mrs. Payne's Garage, that he pitied Marina for, quote, having to take these whiplashes meekly, quietly, and breathing. Of course, it was in that garage that Oswald supposedly stored some of his possessions. Allegedly, this included the Manley carbine that the Warren Commission claimed was used to assassinate President Kennedy. The report claims that Oswald visited Irving unannounced and unusually so for a Thursday night with the surreptitious intention of retrieving the rifle. Ruth Payne would tell the Commission that she found the garage light on in the middle of the night, which led to the assumption that it was Oswald in there making his preparations for the next day. They would go on to say that on the morning of November 22nd, Oswald transported the broken down rifle in a brown paper bag in the company of his regular ride to work at the Texas School Book Depository, but through Wesley Frazier. It was through Frazier's sister, Lily Mae Randall, that Ruth is supposed to have learned of the job opportunity that she told Oswald about. This, in spite of the fact that she apparently did not tell him about a better paid job at Luffield. The website whokilledjfk.net covered this particularly well in an August 2010 post that is worth me reading in full, especially since it also fleshes out some of the points during the recording the video. JFK researchers have long been suspicious of Michael and Ruth Payne. They were, after all, guardians of much of the evidence responsible for convicting Lee Harvey Oswald in the eyes of the public. Perhaps more importantly, Ruth Payne was responsible for finding Oswald a job at the Texas School Depository that would put him in the perfect place to assassinate President Kennedy, or to take the fall. The Warren Report claimed on October 14, 1963, at the suggestion of a neighbour, Mrs. Payne phoned the Texas School Book Depository and was told that there was a job opening. She informed Oswald, who was interviewed the following day, and he started to work there on October 16. What the Commission did not see fit to report was that the neighbour who Mrs. Payne claimed to have informed her of the job opening, Lily Mae Randall, flatly contradicted their testimony. Randall swore before the Commission, "I didn't know there was a job opening there." Just as suspiciously as the commission also knew, Mrs. Payne had withheld from Oswald information that may have led to a better, higher paid job. The day before Oswald began working at the TSBD, Robert Adams of the Texas Employment Commission phoned the Payne home to give Oswald a referral for permanent employment as a cargo handler at Trans-Texas Airways for $310 per month. $100 per month more than he would earn at the book depository. As Adams told the commission, he learned from the person who answered the phone that Oswald was not there. Adams left a message and said that Oswald should contact him at the commission. Receiving no call from Oswald, Adams phoned the Payne residence again the following morning and was informed by Ruth Payne that Oswald had obtained employment elsewhere. As Adams told the Warren Commission, he did not believe that Oswald was ever informed of the job referral. When Mrs. Payne was questioned about this matter by the commission, she first denied any knowledge of the job possibility, then vaguely recalled it. Finally, she lied and said that Oswald had gone into town with some hopes raised by the employment agency, but then reported that the job had been filled and was not available. Another suspicious event involving the Paynes occurred the day of the assassination. This is the aforementioned phone call in the YouTube video. 1 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963, Michael Payne placed a collect call to his wife to discuss Oswald's involvement in the assassination. While the telephone operator remained on the line, Michael Payne told his wife that he felt sure Lee Harvey Oswald had killed the president, but was not responsible. Rather ominously, he added, "We both know who is responsible." The most extraordinary thing about this call is that it took place 1 hour before Oswald's arrest. For obvious reasons, the Warren Commission wanted to sweep this little problem under the rug as swiftly as possible. During Michael Payne's testimony, the ever resourceful Commission Attorney Wesley Liebler changed the date of the call to the following day. Liebler, did you talk to your wife on the telephone at any time during Saturday, November 23rd? Payne, I was in the police station again, and I think I called her from there. Liebler, did you make any remark to the effect that you knew who was responsible? Payne, I don't know who the assassin is or was, so I did not. As researcher John Armstrong pointed out, quote, Liebler had phone company records and an FBI report in hand which showed the collect call was placed on November 22nd and not on November 23rd. By intentionally asking Michael Payne about a non-existent telephone call, Liebler was obstructing justice and colluding with a witness to falsify testimony. The above oddities, and many more besides, demonstrate that there is much more to the Payne family than meets the eye. At the time of the assassination, Michael Payne was working as a research engineer with defence contractor Bell Helicopter. He admitted in his Warren Commission testimony that his job carried security clearance, but claimed, somewhat unbelievably, not to know what the classification of that clearance was. What Michael Payne did not reveal, and what it took researchers 30 years to find out, was that his stepfather, Arthur Young, was the inventor of the Bell Helicopter. As Jim Douglas noted, by heritage, Michael Payne was well connected to the military-industrial complex. His mother was connected to none other than Warren Commissioner Alan Dulles through a lifelong friendship with Mary Bancroft, who, according to Douglas, worked side by side with Alan Dulles as a World War II spy in Switzerland and became his mistress. Ruth Payne's family was directly connected to the CIA. Researcher Steve Jones uncovered documented evidence that the CIA had approached their father, William Avery Hyde, in 1957 to, quote, run an educational cooperative alliance in Vietnam. A few months after the release of the Warren Report, Hyde received a 3-year government contract from AID, that's the Agency for International Development, an organisation said to have extensive ties to the CIA. Indeed, as Jones discovered, Hyde's 8 field reports had been routed through the agency. Former Ohio Governor and later AID Director John Gilligan admitted, quote, at one time, many AID field officers were infiltrated from top to bottom with CIA people. It was pretty well known in the agency who they were and what they were up to. According to Jones, Ruth Payne admitted to a close friend that her father had worked for the CIA as an executive agent. What she did not tell her friend was that her sister Sylvia Hyde Hawke was also employed by the CIA. Steve Jones found documented evidence that Sylvia had worked in the agency as a staff psychologist in 1961. When New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison called Ruth Payne before a grand jury in 1968, he asked her if her sister had done any work for the US government. Amusingly, she admitted that Sylvia had a government job, but claimed not to know what agency she worked for. Most researchers are aware that Maureen Oswald was cut off from Ruth Payne within years of the assassination. What the majority are aware of is the reason why. Apparently, she was advised by the Secret Service to stay away from Ruth Payne because she was sympathising with the CIA. As Maureen swore under oath before the New Orleans grand jury, quote, "It seems like she had friends over there and it would be bad for me if people find out a connection between me and Ruth and CIA." End quote. Bad for Marina or bad for the official story? With the above in mind, there is one question that must be asked. Is there any evidence that Ruth and Michael Payne were involved in any significant intelligence activities in 1963? Well, there is certainly nothing concrete. Much information about the Payne family remains classified. However, buried in volume 19 of the Warren Commission hearings and exhibits is a tantalising and often overlooked clue. According to the report written by Dallas Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters on the day of the assassination, upon searching the Payne's garage, officers found a set of metal filing cabinets that appeared to be the names and activities of Cuban sympathisers. These metal filing cabinets did not make it onto the Dallas Police inventory sheets and were never entered into evidence alongside Lee of the Oswald's belongings. If they did not belong to Oswald, then they must have belonged to the Paynes. And if Ruth and Michael Payne had a set of metal filing cabinets containing the names of activities of Cuban sympathisers, then they were most certainly involved in the same intelligence activities that most researchers believe Oswald was involved in during the summer of 1963. Needless to say, the whereabouts of these filing cabinets is currently unknown. Interestingly, there are reports of similar activity by Ruth during the early 1990s, when she became involved in the political situation in Nicaragua. During the previous decade, the Reagan administration had made a concerted effort to destabilise and overthrow the leftist Sandinista government. In the same way that the CIA had recruited anti-Castro Cubans in the 1960s, the agencies would hire mercenaries linked to the previous corrupt Somoza regime. These Contras were even trained by former Cuban-era alumni such as Felix Rodriguez, Rafael Quintero, and even Ted Shackley. They were funded, of course, by illegal arms sales to Iran, the result of which was the Iran-Contra scandal that almost upended Reagan's second term. Never once to give up lightly, the CIA continued to utilise religious organisations throughout Latin America to undermine domestic, social and political movements and to advance the goals of US policy. One such group, Pro-Nica, was represented by none other than Ruth Payne, who attended meetings ostensibly as a Quaker relief worker, but some believed her instead to be acting in another capacity. Sue Wheaton, a volunteer with the US Committee on Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs, reported Ruth's attendance at meetings. Quote, "I myself did think Ruth was taking down information about Americans in Nicaragua who opposed US policy there. She constantly wrote down names of individuals and organizations. Also, she made reference to people she knew in the US Embassy. Most of us did not know people in the embassy as we associated with the policies we abhorred." I know that Ginty Eugenio has argued that all of this, quote, cinches the case that the Paynes were domestic surveillance agents in the Cold War against communism. But regardless of whether you believe that or not, it is clear that Ruth and Michael, as Hewitt Jones and LaMonica put it, quote, "wittingly or unwittingly, they moved the plot along. By taking in Oswald's family, the Paynes ensured the continued separation of Lee and Marina, thus allowing Lee to play his little spy games in the absence of witnesses to his activities and associates during the critical time leading up to the assassination. The Paynes were the closest persons to Oswald during the months just prior to November 22nd. And their portrayal of him as a cantankerous, violence-prone character with questionable political beliefs lent credibility to the official run of scenario. And as Sylvia Mayer wrote in Accessories After the Fact, quote, Ruth Payne is a complex personality, despite her rather passive facade. Some examples from her testimony show a predisposition against Oswald and a real or pretended friendliness toward the FBI and other establishment institutions, which should not be overlooked in evaluating her role in the case. Mrs. Payne is sometimes a devious person, and her testimony must be evaluated in that light. Ruth is still alive and turned 90 last month. She's spoken to several authors over the years and appeared in many documentaries. She's incredulous to any suggestion she ever had ties to American intelligence. Michael died on March 1st, 2018, at the age of 89. The Payne home at the time of the assassination was purchased by the city of Irving in 2009. It was restored to its 1963 condition and turned into a museum in time for the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination on November 22nd, 2013.
The first fanloads of visitors are getting their load inside a small South Urban home that earned a place in history.
And it was certainly the world came to our door.
The story is long, but the simple version goes like this. Go back 50 years. Ruth Payne lived here and invited a friend to stay over. That friend was married to Lee Harvey Oswald. Oswald was living here when, according to investigators, he killed President John F. Kennedy.
The story we're trying to tell here is how just a simple suburban housewife through some acts of goodwill with another person got thrusted in the national spotlight.
The city of Irving bought the home and converted it into the Ruth Payne House Museum. Walking through the home, guests at this pre-opening reception immediately noticed the 1960s era furnishings.
We came from the same generation.
Charlene Huggins is struck by what she is seeing.
It's kind of chilling. It brings back a lot of memories of that era. And I remember the day exactly.
Well, I thought it was amazing. I was really surprised because as a kid, I played in this house.
Patrice Foster's family was friends with the Paynes.
I played with the kids, even I met Lee.
You met Lee? Your impressions?
No, she always just said, stay away from Lee, don't disturb him. So we just, we were kids, we just running around the house.
To get the home back to the way it looked in 1963, city employees studied photos. Check out the curtains in this Payne family photo. The city found the exact fabric to remake them. And this photo of the kitchen helped them duplicate many of the details in there.
And the guy said, hey, I can make something that will look like that washing machine. I tell you, when I saw that picture, I saw the washing machine. Yeah, it really looks convincing.
Probably asked Ruth Payne 10,000 questions about what color was the carpet, what color were the walls, what did the sink look like? I'm asking her these things 50 years later, but she was a good sport and had a good memory too.
Yeah. They made the house. They built it.
It all comes together to tell the story of contrasts. A busy mother raising kids while suddenly finding herself in one of the news events of the century.
In relation to the assassination, I think this house really does tell a story, and I was nervous about coming. Well, how will it be done? But seems to be it's been done very well.
The first stop for guests is actually here at the visitor center on the 3rd floor of the Central Library. People can watch vintage news reports, hear residents' recollections, and more.
Because the house is in a residential neighborhood, we don't want people just driving to the house. So you'll come here to the visitor center, get some background information, and then you will go downstairs to the thing and drive over to the house.
Once at the house, visitors can take in video recreations in 2 rooms and the garage, where investigators say Oswald got the gun he used.
The police throw the question on people working at the Texas School Book Depository that morning. The Oswald was no longer present. Those are the real words and the real stories of the real people.
I love the technology they're using with the glass and the movie. I love the story that they're telling in each different room. I think they're doing.
So this would be Ruth's room, and where she slept.
For group visits, guides will also explain some of the details that might be missed on an initial walkthrough.
This is the room that Lee Harvey slept in the night before. And the little cup on the dresser is supposedly where he left his wedding ring in there when he left.
The organization Preservation Dallas working to get this home on the National Register of Historic Places.
So we have every review that we'll go through, but we don't have that.
I think we're gonna see a lot of people come to Irving as part of this and visit. I can tell you that we've already been getting calls from all over the United States.
From the complicated conspiracy theories to the tough tasks of motherhood, this home tells the story of Ruth Payne's time in Irving, a story she is happy to share.
It was important for the country to have whatever information I could provide. Because I had seen Lee in an informal setting for those 2 months just prior to this. And, you know, I wanted people to know what happened.
He did go on the register the following year in 2014. Endosaurus. That's a joke of his son. Good thought, as usual. That's it, finished. So I don't claim to know a lot more than what I talk about. But I mean, I suppose everyone wants to ask if someone I'm trying. Yeah, I've got a question, but
It struck me as you were going through that. I mean, given the network of people paying sad and Michael went to Harvard and he had a good job, Bill Elitox. It seems a bit odd that they were living in such a modest accommodation. It just doesn't reconcile, in my view, with the background that they had.
I think not so much today. I think back then it was quite a reasonably well-to-do area.
I mean, you look at General Walker's.
Oh well, yes, certainly not as
And he was a military man.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
but he would have a significant amount of money, would he?
You know,
Here,
Well, he was squaddy, he was a general.
No, I appreciate it. I'm just saying that,
He had his hands in the John Birch's Tilburg, didn't he? John Walker, I remember that from earlier, or yesterday, or sorry. Apologies, Neil, carry on.
no, you can't.
No, so that's where, yeah, that's where Walker got his extra cash from, he was basically. Go on. Stupid question time, so
Oh, stupid
everyone will expect that from me, so, you know, and as well as my stating the obvious. I take it from the presentation, Paul, that it's a fairly safe bet that Ruth Payne wasn't really a Quaker. It seemed like it was a flag of convenience. It was quite probably operational in order that she could then ingratiate herself with various organisations and do pretty much a Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans, trying to interact socialist sympathisers and so on, get their names and quite obviously from the filing cabinets. And then you talked in previous talks about fingerprints of intelligence. Well, these guys stink of it. Is that fair to say that she wasn't really a Quaker?
I think somebody hit the nail on the head last night and said Nixon, or maybe the night before, Nixon was a Quaker. Nobody lied more than Nixon. Probably Donald Trump, but so that would be the way I would answer that.
Okay, and further
Doesn't
on,
mean that.
sorry, go on.
Yeah, doesn't mean somebody's religious affiliation with strange bedfellows meet, don't they? And I think possibly the family connections and the background is maybe more of a indication of that perhaps people that they were.
I also take it, forgive me wrong, and stating the obvious wrong, all the stories, or sorry, the reports of Lee Harvey Oswald's abusiveness and control relationship towards Marina, etc., etc., etc. Again, all made up in order to create a bad impression of Oswald.
Not necessarily. I think there's always an element. It's similar to JFK's sexual peccadillos, isn't it? It doesn't mean to say that a lot of it wasn't true, but doesn't mean to say what happened to him was right, or that he wasn't a great president that had the right kind of policies. I think it's a similar kind of scenario to that. I think he may well have been. I mean, he was certainly a character. He was certainly, yeah, breakfast this morning, we were talking about the possibility of him having aspersions.
Is that Oswald?
Oswald, yeah. And whereas that's, again, it's not an excuse for behaviour if he was abusive. It may well be that the pains highlighted that. But again, it's, unless you're actually there, you don't know, do you? And that's the beauty of history. It's all our interpretation of people's information.
Is there any other evidence of, sorry, is there another question? Is there any other evidence of the Paynes doing anything else following on from this? Do they get involved in any other obvious?
We could argue with stuff with Ruth.
Oh, yeah.
Fascinating. I do want to look into that more. Obviously, I said earlier, Bart sent us a lot of files, so to actually go in to see some of the actual original documentation will be interesting. See what's in there. Potentially follow up and rest date.
Next presentation.
It is fascinating. It just seemed great timing when Neale messaged about somebody going to find a slot, and I'd just finished reading and thought that would be the perfect thing to talk about, and we enjoyed doing it.
Yeah.
Hope everybody enjoyed it.
Yes.
An interesting side on Bell Haircuts. I seem to remember Lady Bird Johnson's family were major shareholders. Sure, we'll get no more. See, he's
Any, and even in the reconstructed Payne house today, where they put it back together again as when we think of metal filing cabinet full of Cuban exile or whatever, Cuban activists, is there any photographic evidence? I mean, you could filing, metal filing could be just this big,
Well, it could be little cards with
little
names on.
cards in it, yeah.
And that garage was pretty jam-packed.
It was, yeah, it was all sorts of mechanical and all sorts.
Nobody ever puts cars in there.
No. 60 years later, that changed.
Oh,
yeah.
Did you ever look at the allegations of Roy Frankhausen?
No. Don't even recognize the name.
He was an informant for the FBI and said he was penetrating left wing, well, he penetrated both sides, left and right. But in New York, he worked with Michael Payne. He said that was an allegation. But Frankhausen was also mixed up with Warren Du Bois at some stage. And at the time of the Warren Commission, he states that Du Bois threatened him. If he came forward and said anything. I think the exact quote was, "I'll get your ass." Frankhausen, Roy Frankhausen. There's very little on him. I have a few FBI pages on him, but it's a name to look for. See if you can connect anything to the things. It sounds about right. I mean, if he's a penetration guy, left and right.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
So we have a break.